Greetings, I'm Victor, I'm a flight simulator enthusiast and real-world pilot. In the last few years, flight simulations have improved a lot, and once again I had some fun playing IL-2 and DCS, especially helicopters in DCS. I have always liked force feedback joysticks. However, I have found myself missing the precision I needed for helicopter flight and a proper aviation grip. So I have built myself a force feedback flight simulator stick that fit my needs perfectly. Basically, I've used a Sidewinder force feedback 2 joystick base. I have increased the force feedback. I have added a switch to be able to turn it on and off at any time. I've extended the stick and I've added a proper B8 grip, which is used on many types of helicopters and military fixed-wing aircraft. As for the parts, I have used a Microsoft Sidewinder force feedback 2 joystick as mentioned. These ones are out of production for a few years now, but you can get them on eBay for around about 30 to 80 euros. For the grip, I have used a Thrustmaster TopGun joystick. Got it for around about 15 euros. This one has a game port plug, but that's not quite important for us. I've used a carbon pipe with an inside diameter of 14 millimeters, a simple 2-pin switch, and some SMD resistors. Used some basic tools, a multimeter, and some soldering equipment. Find all parts and tools you need in the show notes below. But before we start, I need you to acknowledge the following. I'm far from being an expert in electronics or electrics. My knowledge and skills are very basic. Modding your stick, you'll have to open its casing. Never do this while the stick is plugged to your computer or the 110 or 230 volt supply. Do this mod at your own risk. Let's start by deassembling the Thrustmaster TopGun. This is all we need. We will use its grip, the buttons, some wires, and a part of its white gimbal. This is what the stick looks like inside. We will have to do some soldering to connect the Thrustmaster TopGun buttons to the MS Sidewinder board. Don't be worried by the amount of cables. The electrics are pretty straightforward. The head switch and all buttons can easily be accessed. Our first step will be to test if the buttons still work. Sometimes, especially with older joysticks, one or two may not be working and will need replacement. For the test, you have to hold each multimeter input at one pin of a button and then press the button. With the multimeter setting shown in the video, you will hear a beep telling you the button is fine. As I only had one free hand to use, I had to do it in a slightly different way, but the result is the same. Now let's take a look at the head switch. It has its own little board, which we will not be using. We will later unsolder it. This is what the switch looks like from inside. Basically, the 4 buttons are held in place by the board on the back side. So before we remove the board, let's make sure we glue the buttons in place. I've used hot glue and it looked something like this. Now let's remove the solder and with it the board. What you see now is an arrangement of 4 buttons with 4 pins each. We will solder 2 cables onto every button. One on an inner pin and one on an outer pin. Use some cables from the TopGun's base and choose one color for every button to make it easier. This is what it looked like after a few minutes of preparing and soldering. Use shrinking tube wherever necessary. So far, the head switch is ready to be connected with the board. But first, let's prepare the other buttons. Remove the silver cable and instead add one cable to the free pin on every button. Again, use the same color for the wires. This is what my wiring looked like. Okay, let's move over to the MS Sidewinder. Open up the grip. You will find three main components here. The main board of the grip with the head switch and a few buttons. We will keep that part. The potentiometer can be removed as we will not use the Sidewinder's yaw axis. As for the other board, it's responsible for sensing whether your hand is at the controls or not to command force feedback on or off. But we have a different solution in mind, so you can also remove this part. Okay, now let's unsolder the cables and all buttons from the Sidewinder board. As you might have already guessed, we will connect the Thrustmaster TopGun's components here. The fun fact here is, the Sidewinder board almost perfectly fits into the TopGun grip. It just needs a little trim on two of its corners. Now it's time for more soldering. Here's a scheme that shows how to connect each and every cable. It doesn't matter which way you connect the cables as long as the colors match. Also, there's one spot on the board that needs your attention. Here you'll have to solder in a connection between two conductors. Just use that silver wire from earlier on. Once all buttons are soldered, we need to re-establish a connection between the board and the base of the MS Sidewinder. As we'll extend the length of the stick, we'll need some longer wires here. We'll find them in the Thrustmaster TopGun base. Here I have prepared the connection. And here it's soldered onto the board. Time to see if all the buttons and the head switch work. Let's temporarily connect the wires of the base to the ones from the grip board. You can either solder them or just hold them together with some tape. Connect the MS Sidewinder with your PC and check it out in the game controller menu. Yay, all the buttons work. Before we reassemble the grip, we'll insert the white plastic mount. As we don't need the gimbal, we can simply cut it off. To make room for the MS Sidewinder board, we need to trim the white plastic a bit. This is the final result. Now carefully close the grip. Try not to damage any of the wires and don't forget the trigger. Phew, the B8 grip is finished. Let's move over to the Sidewinder's base. This is what it looks like. Remove the cables from the board on the right hand. Turn it around and you'll find 8 important SMD resistors. They are responsible for the electrical current in the force feedback motors. Modifying them will modify the force feedback's power. We will solder the same type of resistor on top of the existing ones. That will double the current and set our stick on steroids. Before you start soldering those delicate parts, I suggest you do a few practice runs with boards that you don't need anymore. Also, here's a video tutorial on how to solder SMD resistors. So this is what it looks like when it's finished. Now reconnect the board and put it back into its position. Next, we want to set up a switch to be able to turn on and off the FFB. Maybe you remember the board with a diode and a photocell, which we have removed from the Sidewinder earlier. We'll use its grey and white wires and connect them to a simple 2-pin switch. That's it already. The space inside the Sidewinder space is quite cramped. I found this position to be fine, drilled a hole and installed the switch. The purple, black and dark red wires are not needed anymore, you can cut them off. Now comes the last part, connecting the components. First, we need to remove some of the plastic of the Sidewinder shaft. It should look like this. Be sure to sand the plastic down, but leave the pin. Now let's prepare the carbon pipe. I've cut it down to 15 centimeters and added a slot for the pin. When working with a saw or a Dremel, be sure to do this outside and don't breathe in the dust. Carbon dust is pretty bad for your health. This is what our extension pipe looks like. Now its inside diameter is 14 millimeters and it fits perfectly on top of the Sidewinder shaft. However, for the Thrustmaster TopGun shaft it's too big, so I glued in some plastic pipe I had over. Finally, Prepare some heat shrinking tube, solder the wire connection of the grip to the base and insulate it. Put the carbon pipe in place, choose a nice angle for your grip and glue it in place. So here we are, the stick is finally finished, our work has paid off. Now we have a nice stick extension while maintaining FFB force. We can switch off FFB or leave it on whilst our hands are free. Flying a propeller aircraft and smaller jets feels quite realistic with aerodynamic force and buffeting, and precise control of helicopters is now possible. And finally, the B8 grip just feels and looks great. So I hope this video helped you. If you do have any questions, feel free to leave a comment, and I wish you successful virtual flights and many happy landings.